In May of 633 AD, under a burning sky near the Euphrates, an army marched onto a battlefield it believed was already won. 30,000 Persian soldiers, disciplined infantry, armored cavalry, veterans of one of the most powerful empires on earth, advanced with absolute confidence. Across from them stood barely 15,000 men. No walls, no reinforcements, no obvious path to victory. On paper, this wasn't a battle, it was an execution waiting to happen. And yet, by sunset, that imperial army would be gone. Not pushed back, not scattered, but completely destroyed. This is the moment everything changed, and it didn't happen because of superior numbers, better weapons, or sheer force. It happened because of one decision, one strategy, one commander who understood something his enemy did not. How do you defeat an army twice your size without matching its strength? How do you convince a confident empire to walk exactly where you want it to go, without them ever realizing it? And more importantly, how do you close the trap so completely that escape is no longer even an option? This is the story of how a single, calculated idea turned certainty into catastrophe, and how one man transformed the battlefield into a controlled environment where every move the enemy made was already predicted. By the end of this video, you won't just understand what happened at Walaja, you'll understand why it was inevitable. In 633 AD, the Persian Empire was a force the world both feared and respected. Stretching across vast swaths of Mesopotamia, its influence had been solidified over centuries, with borders that had been contested and defended against Romans, Byzantines, and countless other challengers. To anyone observing from afar, the empire appeared invincible. Its cities thrived with wealth, its rulers commanded loyalty through generations, and its armies carried the weight of experience, discipline, and centuries of military innovation. This was a society where power was structured, hierarchical, and absolute, and on the battlefield, that structure translated into precision, cohesion, and near certainty of victory. The Persian military doctrine was built around these very principles. Every soldier knew their place. Every cavalry unit had drilled the same maneuvers countless times. Heavy infantry formed unbreakable blocks, shields locked together like interlocking stone, and lamellar armor encased the men in layers of protection that could withstand arrows, javelins, and swords alike. Every maneuver was predictable, rehearsed, and based on a long tradition of success. Commanders had been trained to trust in procedure, to rely on numbers, and to believe that no army, however clever, could outthink the systems honed over generations. Confidence was not arrogance. It was a product of a proven methodology, and for the Persian generals, it was a guarantee that the right formation executed at the right time would always succeed. At the heart of this empire's fighting machine were its elite forces. On the flanks rode the Svaran cavalry, riders trained from childhood to move as one with their horses, equipped with lances and bows and a mastery of mobility that made them both terrifying and unpredictable, at least to enemies who failed to understand their limits. At the center, heavy infantry advanced in disciplined ranks, moving as one organism across open terrain. Archers provided suppression, artillery-like precision in the form of javelins and missile volleys, softening targets before the main engagement. It was a system that had been tested time and again. It had conquered cities, quelled rebellions, and humiliated empires that had once thought themselves untouchable. And yet, despite all of this, the Persians made a critical assumption. They underestimated the Arab forces standing across from them. To the commanders who had spent their lives mastering formations and commanding thousands of soldiers, 15,000 Arabs, largely unarmored, lightly equipped, and drawn from desert tribes, seemed an insignificant annoyance. They were a nuisance, not a threat. The empire had faced many foes who relied on speed, surprise, or cunning. Time and again, these smaller forces had been crushed when confronted head-on. The Arab armies, to the Persians, were no different. Their confidence in victory was complete, unshakable, and utterly predictable. This underestimation was exactly the vulnerability that would be exploited. The Persian commanders believed in the rules of engagement they had been taught, in the reliability of their formations, in the inevitability of their own success. They assumed that discipline and strength could overcome any unconventional tactic. What they did not anticipate was the type of strategy that disregards raw power entirely, replacing it with precision, patience, and a profound understanding of human behavior under pressure. The Arab forces, though fewer in number, were led by a commander who recognized the limits of brute force, who understood that overconfidence could be manipulated, and who would exploit every assumption, every expectation, every rigid rule the Persians held sacred. By presenting a picture of overwhelming strength and historic dominance, the Persian Empire had unknowingly set the stage for its own downfall. Their wealth, their training, their confidence, all the attributes that had made them so formidable, became tools in the hands of a strategist who knew how to turn predictability into a weapon. The army that seemed invincible was about to encounter a type of warfare it had never faced before. One where control of the battlefield did not come from armor or numbers, but from the ability to dictate where, when, and how the enemy could move. As the sun rose over the plains near the Euphrates, the Persians believed they were advancing onto a simple, open field. Every ridge, every open stretch of ground, seemed to favor their doctrine. Their soldiers moved forward with confidence, their cavalry positioned with meticulous care, their archers ready to soften any resistance. And yet, beneath their feet, under the quiet observation of the Arab commander, every step they took was being calculated, measured, and anticipated. The Persian army, in all its grandeur and experience, had walked straight into the most carefully orchestrated challenge it would ever face, and it had not even realized it. The stage was set not by numbers, not by technology, and certainly not by luck, but by a clear understanding of power, both visible and hidden. The Persian Empire was strong, disciplined, and confident, but it was about to meet a force that would rewrite the rules of engagement, proving that in warfare, as in life, perception and strategy can outweigh raw might. The difference between victory and annihilation would hinge not on courage or loyalty, but on the subtle art of manipulation and the patience to let overconfidence carry an enemy into a trap from which there was no escape. Khalid ibn al-Walid understood that winning this battle would not be a matter of brute force. He knew the Persian Empire was powerful, disciplined, and confident, and any frontal clash on open ground would be disastrous for his smaller force. So instead of meeting them head-on, he turned his attention to the battlefield itself. The wide, flat plain near Walaja might have looked ordinary to an untrained eye, but to Khalid, it was a canvas on which he could orchestrate his masterpiece. Every ridge, every dip, every stretch of open ground had a purpose, and every element was chosen to manipulate the perception of the Persian commanders. To them, it appeared to be ideal terrain for their methodical, disciplined advance, and that was exactly what Khalid wanted. He positioned his infantry in the center, forming a line that seemed vulnerable, inviting pressure. At first glance, it was easy for any observer to assume that the Arabs were outnumbered, outmatched, and at a disadvantage. This was the first illusion, the illusion of weakness. Khalid allowed his men to appear exposed, even retreating slightly at the first contact, as though the Persian push was overwhelming. To the Persian commanders, this reinforced everything they already believed, that their superior numbers and armor would crush the Arab resistance in short order. What they could not see was the careful calculation behind every backward step. Every yard the Arab line relinquished was measured, deliberate, and designed to draw the Persians deeper into the trap. But Khalid's genius lay not only in creating the illusion of vulnerability, but in what remained unseen. Hidden behind the low ridges on both flanks were the most critical components of his plan: two separate cavalry units, ordered to remain still, silent, and invisible. For hours, these forces waited, concealed from view, poised to strike at the precise moment the Persian advance had committed itself fully. This was not improvisation. It was a principle of strategy that required patience, timing, and absolute confidence in his men. The cavalry would not act until Khalid gave the signal, ensuring that the Persian army would unknowingly step into the trap he had laid. The Persian battle plan was predictable because it followed the doctrines they had perfected over centuries. Their heavy infantry would advance in disciplined blocks, pushing the Arab center backward, while their cavalry on the wings sought room to exploit breakthroughs. Archers would soften the enemy before contact, and commanders trusted that the sheer weight of numbers and training would guarantee success. In other words, The Persians played exactly into Khalid's hands. By understanding the psychology and doctrine of his enemy, he knew how they would react to pressure, how they would respond to apparent weakness, and how their overconfidence would drive them into his carefully engineered position. As the sun rose over the Walaja plain, everything appeared as the Persians expected. Their soldiers moved with precision, their formations tight, and their commanders confident that victory was certain. But beneath that calm surface, the Arab lines were anything but passive. Every step backward, every measured withdrawal, was a deliberate move to stretch the Persian line and create the vulnerabilities Khalid had anticipated. He allowed the center to give ground, making it seem as though the Arab army was faltering, while his hidden cavalry waited patiently behind the ridges, invisible and immobile, like coiled springs ready to release. What Khalid was doing required more than military skill. It required psychological insight. He understood that imperial armies relied not just on strength, but on certainty. The Persians needed to feel in control, to believe that each advance was bringing them closer to inevitable victory. By maintaining the illusion that the Arabs were faltering, Khalid forced the Persians to overcommit. He turned their confidence into a liability, exploiting their reliance on doctrine rather than adaptability. Each forward step they took, each reinforcer thrown into the pressure, only tightened the web Khalid had designed. In a sense, the battlefield itself became an instrument of strategy. The open plain, which had seemed to favor the Persians, was actually a controlled environment where every movement could be anticipated. The ridges acted as both concealment and boundary, guiding the Persian forces into the precise positions where they would be most vulnerable. The Arab center, appearing weak but disciplined, drew the Persians into overextension. The hidden cavalry, silent and invisible, waited for the exact moment when the trap would snap shut. By orchestrating this setup, Khalid turned the enemy's doctrine into a weapon against them, transforming predictable behavior into a fatal mistake. This was a masterclass in strategic patience. Khalid did not react emotionally to the enemy's advance. He did not rush to engage or waste resources in a premature strike. Instead, he observed, measured, and controlled every variable he could. He understood that the ultimate victory would not come from immediate combat superiority but from shaping the battlefield in such a way that the Persians, confident and disciplined, would take the actions that played directly into his plan. By the time they realized the true nature of the trap, escape would be impossible. The genius of Khalid's setup at Walaja was not merely in hiding forces or feigning weakness. It was in understanding the enemy so thoroughly that their strengths became their undoing. He had studied how the Persian commanders thought, how their armies moved, and how their doctrines dictated their behavior. Then he designed a battlefield, positioned his forces, and controlled the illusion to exploit every predictable reaction. It was a game of psychology, geometry, and timing, each element working in concert to turn apparent disadvantage into absolute control. By the time the Persian commanders committed fully to their advance, they had unknowingly entered a trap that had been waiting for them for hours. Khalid's forces appeared weak, the cavalry invisible, the terrain ordinary, but the strategy was anything but. Every detail was deliberate, every risk calculated, and every outcome anticipated. The stage was set for a decisive, breathtaking reversal, and the Persian army, confident in its superiority, had no idea what was coming. In the quiet before the storm, the battlefield was not just terrain, it was the instrument through which Khalid ibn al-Walid would demonstrate why true mastery in strategy is as much about perception, patience, and control as it is about power. As the Persian forces advanced, the Arab lines began their carefully measured retreat. To any observer, it appeared as though the smaller force was faltering, yielding ground under overwhelming pressure. But what looked like exhaustion or weakness was, in reality, the embodiment of Khalid's strategy. Every step backward was calculated, every inch of terrain surrendered deliberately to lure the enemy deeper into a trap they could not perceive. The Persian commanders, trained to recognize victory through linear progression, push, break, collapse, saw only confirmation of their superiority. They were marching straight into the narrative they believed would end in triumph. The Arab infantry maintained discipline, absorbing blows, sustaining casualties, but never breaking. Khalid's men were not panicked, not reacting hastily. They were instruments of precision, bending in a way that increased tension but never fractured. The Persians, however, saw this controlled withdrawal as an opportunity to exploit what they believed was a weakening center. Reinforcements were pushed forward, lines pressed tighter, and the overconfidence of the imperial army began to stretch their formations beyond optimal cohesion. Heavy infantry blocks moved faster than the wings could keep pace, creating subtle gaps. Archers and cavalry drifted outward seeking opportunities, unknowingly widening the space between units. From his vantage behind the Arab center, Khalid watched the scene unfold like a chess master anticipating moves several turns ahead. He did not intervene prematurely. Every action of the Persian army was reinforcing his plan. Each surge of infantry, every push into what seemed like Arab vulnerability, was tightening the trap. The Persian commanders believed they were dictating the terms of the battle, but in reality, they were doing exactly what Khalid wanted. Their overconfidence had blinded them to the subtle manipulation occurring right before their eyes. The heat of the sun, the dust of the plains, the weight of armor, all these factors worked against the Persians, though they remained unaware. Their discipline forced them to commit further, their doctrine demanded progression, and their confidence convinced them that every step forward was gaining ground. But in reality, each advance extended their line, stretched their flanks, and delayed communication. Command orders took longer to propagate, signals became confused, and the cohesive structure that had made the Persian army formidable was gradually weakening under the pressure of its own assumptions. Khalid's central tactic hinged on timing. He needed the Persians to overcommit, to place themselves in a position where retreat would feel impossible psychologically, even if physically feasible. Every backward step taken by the Arab center was a calculated invitation, a subtle message. Keep going. Push further. You are winning. The Persian commanders complied, driven by doctrine, by habit, by the very confidence that Khalid sought to exploit. Their own momentum became a weapon turned against them. Meanwhile, the hidden cavalry remained motionless, their presence undetected, waiting for the exact moment when the Persian line had become overextended. Every delayed reaction, every adjustment by the Persian wings, played into Khalid's design. The longer the advance continued, the more tension built in the Persian formations. Fatigue increased, communication lagged, gaps widened. What the Persians believed was a straightforward engagement was evolving into a perfect environment for envelopment. The brilliance of the setup was not just in the deception but in Khalid's understanding of human psychology under pressure. Imperial armies thrived on certainty. When predictability is broken, hesitation becomes inevitable. By appearing vulnerable while maintaining unbroken discipline, Khalid forced the Persians to act on assumptions that were carefully manipulated. Their confidence propelled them forward, yet it simultaneously led them towards structural vulnerabilities they could not anticipate. Every committed step further embedded them into a scenario where their own strength, numbers, armor, training, would fail to protect them. Even the Persian cavalry, trained to exploit breakthroughs, became compromised. As the infantry surged forward and the center bent in a controlled retreat, the wings stretched to maintain alignment, losing cohesion and momentum. The hidden Arab cavalry, once signaled, would hit precisely when the Persian forces were most vulnerable, spread thin, off balance, and psychologically primed to react rather than anticipate. By the time the cavalry moved, escape would no longer be simple. The Persian army would be encircled not by chance, but by the meticulous orchestration of strategy, patience, and control. Every minute the Persians continued their advance under this illusion amplified the effectiveness of Khalid's plan. What might have seemed like a slow, exhausting battle was, in truth, a carefully choreographed progression toward a decisive reversal. The Persian forces were performing exactly as Khalid predicted, unaware that the Arab center's retreat was not a weakness, but the lure that made their overextension fatal. By the time the signal came, the battlefield would be set, the enemy committed, and the moment of irreversible advantage would arrive. In this phase of the battle, the true genius of Khalid ibn al-Walid became evident. He was not merely defending against a stronger opponent, he was dictating the enemy's every move. He transformed a seemingly hopeless scenario into a controlled environment where the Persian army's confidence, discipline, and predictability became their undoing. Every action, every reaction, every surge forward played into a preordained outcome. By the time the Persian commanders realized they were overcommit, it would be too late. The execution phase, fueled by calculated deception and psychological manipulation, had set the stage for a complete and devastating envelopment, a moment that would forever change the course of the campaign and redefine the concept of strategic mastery. The moment Khalid had been waiting for finally arrived. Hours of patience, observation, and subtle manipulation had brought the Persian army to a point of overcommitment. Their lines were stretched, their formations elongated, and their confidence blinding them to the dangers that had been quietly waiting in the wings. The Persians believed they were dictating the battle. They thought every step forward was their triumph. In reality, they were stepping into a trap of their own making. From behind the center, Khalid raised his arm, the signal subtle yet precise. Across the ridges, the hidden Arab cavalry shifted, first in barely perceptible motion, then breaking into a gallop. The desert dust kicked up into clouds, masking their approach. To the Persian infantry, it appeared as though reinforcements had come from nowhere, appearing from angles they believed were empty. Their disciplined advance, once a source of certainty, now became a liability. Confusion rippled through the ranks. Shields were turned to confront threats from the sides, only to find themselves vulnerable elsewhere. Commands contradicted each other as officers shouted orders that no longer matched the battlefield's reality. Khalid's center, which had appeared to retreat for hours, now surged forward with renewed aggression. The timing was impeccable. The Persian army, already stretched thin, found itself compressed from three sides: front, flanks, and rear. The heavy infantry blocks, so effective in disciplined advance, now struggled to maintain cohesion. Cavalry units that had been waiting to exploit gaps found themselves attacking an enemy that was already controlling the pace and space of engagement. Every attempt to reorganize, to restore order, only deepened the chaos. The Persians were no longer an army moving with purpose. They were a trapped crowd, reacting, stumbling, and falling under the relentless pressure of a strategy they never saw coming. What had begun as a confident advance now turned into containment. Horses thundered from behind, smashing into unprotected infantry, while the Arab center pushed forward with perfect timing. Panic spread faster than commands could be issued. Men dropped their shields, others tripped over the fallen, and the lines that had once seemed invincible fractured into chaos. Khalid did not pursue recklessly. His discipline ensured the operation remained precise. Every move was calculated, every action reinforced the trap. The Persian army's own certainty, the very trait that had made it formidable, had become its undoing. The battlefield transformed into a closing net. Dust and screams filled the air, banners trampled, armor weighing down the fallen. Thousands of Persian soldiers fell, thousands more fled in fragmented groups. Command structures collapsed as officers struggled to regain control. Orders arrived too late or not at all. Units attempting to pivot or retreat collided with each other, creating chaos where organization once reigned. And through it all, Khalid maintained control, moving where necessary to exploit weaknesses, advancing where opportunity had been created, and withdrawing where restraint would deepen the psychological impact. It was not just physical destruction that Khalid achieved, it was psychological devastation. The idea of Persian invincibility, of certainty on the battlefield, was shattered in minutes. Even those who survived carried the fear of unpredictability into every subsequent engagement. They had been defeated not only by the Arab force but by a commander who had dictated their behavior, anticipated their responses, and weaponized their own doctrines against them. The empire that had ruled Mesopotamia with confidence now faced an uncomfortable truth. Their training and experience were no match for ingenuity, patience, and timing. The elegance of Khalid's execution lay in the way he combined deception, discipline, and timing. The Arab center had bled but never broken. The hidden cavalry had remained invisible until the precise moment of impact. Terrain, previously perceived as neutral, had been manipulated to control every movement of the enemy. Every inch of space, every step of forward momentum, had been calculated to maximize vulnerability. The Persians believed they were winning right up until the moment the traps snapped shut, and by then, there was no escape. As the sun sank over the Walaja plain, the scene was one of absolute devastation. Thousands of bodies littered the ground. Persian banners, symbols of centuries of imperial power, lay crushed in dust. Survivors fled in disarray, abandoning equipment, abandoning order, abandoning any hope of regrouping. And amidst this destruction, the Arab forces remained disciplined, composed, and in control. Khalid had not just won a battle, he had rewritten the rules of engagement, proving that strategy, patience, and psychological mastery could triumph over numbers, armor, and traditional strength. The impact of this victory would echo far beyond the battlefield. Persian commanders, once confident in the inevitability of their victories, now hesitated. Every open plain seemed risky, every advance cautious. Units that previously moved like a machine now operated with trepidation. And Khalid's forces continued to exploit this hesitation in every subsequent encounter. Walaja was not just a battle, it was a lesson in the art of control. By dictating the terms of engagement, timing attacks to the millisecond, and exploiting the psychology of the opponent, Khalid had transformed a small, underpowered army into an unstoppable force. In retrospect, the Battle of Walaja stands as a masterclass in military strategy. Numbers, discipline, and equipment are important, but they are secondary to timing, perception, and the ability to manipulate the enemy's decisions. Khalid ibn al-Walid did not simply defeat the Persian army, he orchestrated their collapse, turning predictability into vulnerability, confidence into chaos. And in doing so, he demonstrated that true mastery on the battlefield belongs not to the largest army, but to the commander who can control space, time, and the enemy's mind. By the end of that day, the Persians had learned a lesson that would haunt their empire for years. Certainty is fragile, and a single, well-executed strategy can change the course of history. Khalid's genius was not in brute force, but in understanding how to make an opponent commit to their own destruction, and then closing the door at the perfect moment. When the dust finally settled on the Walaja plain, the battlefield was eerily silent. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over a scene of total devastation. Thousands of Persian soldiers lay motionless, their armor and banners trampled in the dirt, while scattered survivors fled in disarray. Yet, amid this chaos, the Arab forces remained disciplined, organized, and unscathed in terms of cohesion. Khalid ibn al-Walid had not only won a battle, he had orchestrated a complete collapse of the enemy's confidence and control. The immediate aftermath on the Persian side was catastrophic, but the long-term effects were even more profound. Their army, though not entirely destroyed, had lost its psychological edge. Commanders who once trusted their doctrines implicitly now questioned every decision, every advance, every moment of hesitation. The idea that they could predict the battlefield, that imperial formations guaranteed victory, had been shattered in a single day. What Khalid had demonstrated at Walaja was not just tactical brilliance, it was the art of controlling the mind of the enemy, forcing them to act in ways that played directly into his strategy. This shift in perception had cascading consequences. Persian units in subsequent campaigns hesitated where they would once have advanced confidently. Cavalry that previously struck decisively now paused, uncertain of whether movement would lead to ambush. Infantry commanders double-checked every alignment, every formation, fearing overextension. The doctrine that had allowed Persia to dominate other empires for centuries became a liability because it created predictable behavior that Khalid could exploit. In essence, Walaja had broken the invisible backbone of the Persian army, their certainty. For the Arab forces, the victory was transformative as well. It solidified Khalid's reputation as a master strategist, a commander whose insight, timing, and patience could overcome overwhelming odds. Men who had been outnumbered 2-1 now moved with confidence, their morale reinforced by the knowledge that brilliance and preparation could triumph over raw strength. This victory became a blueprint for future engagements. Every subsequent battle would echo the lessons of Walaja: patience, calculated withdrawal, control of space and timing, and the psychological manipulation of the enemy were far more powerful than brute force alone. The Battle of Walaja also had strategic and political consequences. The Persian Empire, long confident in its dominance, could no longer assume victory based solely on size, training, or armor. Governors in Mesopotamia reported hesitation, delayed movements, and uncharacteristic caution among their forces. Reinforcements arrived slowly, and coordination between units became fragmented. The empire, once a juggernaut of military power, had to reckon with a new reality. An agile, intelligent opponent could dictate the terms of engagement, even in situations where numbers and equipment seemed to guarantee success. Khalid's victory was not about annihilating every Persian soldier on the field. It was about sending a clear, undeniable message. The Persian military, for all its strength and discipline, was not infallible. Certainty could be manipulated, overconfidence could be weaponized, and a smaller, smarter force could dominate through superior understanding of both terrain and psychology. By the end of that day, the Persians had learned a lesson that would resonate for generations. Doctrine alone does not win wars. Insight, timing, and control of the enemy's perception do. Walaja also demonstrated the power of restraint. Khalid did not recklessly chase fleeing soldiers or expend his forces unnecessarily. Instead, he maintained discipline, ensuring that every move reinforced the psychological impact of the victory. The lesson for his army was clear: control, patience, and precision were far more effective than mindless aggression. This principle would carry them through subsequent campaigns, allowing a smaller force to systematically erode the confidence and effectiveness of a much larger empire. Ultimately, the aftermath of Walaja was about transformation. The Persian Empire, though still intact, had suffered a profound blow to its military soul. Confidence, predictability, and discipline, once the cornerstones of imperial strength, had been turned into vulnerabilities. Every encounter after Walaja carried an invisible weight, a lingering memory of a day when brilliance overcame numbers and strategy shattered doctrine. Khalid ibn al-Walid had done more than win a battle. He had changed the way wars were fought, proving that true mastery belonged to those who could control not just the battlefield, but the mind of the enemy. By the time the Arab forces withdrew from the plain, the psychological landscape of the conflict had shifted irreversibly. Persian commanders now approached every engagement with caution, hesitation, and doubt. The momentum of the empire, once unstoppable, was fractured. And Khalid, ever patient, had set the stage for future campaigns, where his understanding of timing, terrain, and human psychology would continue to transform disadvantage into decisive advantage. Walaja was not just a victory, it was the blueprint of a genius strategy, a demonstration of control, patience, and the profound power of anticipating and dictating the enemy's actions. In the quiet aftermath, the lesson was clear to all who witnessed or heard of the battle. The strongest force is not always the one with the most soldiers or the heaviest armor. The strongest force is the one that can manipulate certainty, exploit human nature, and turn the predictable into the instrument of total domination. And on that scorched plain near the Euphrates, Khalid ibn al-Walid proved it beyond doubt. The Battle of Walaja wasn't just a clash of armies. It was a masterclass in strategy, timing, and psychological warfare. Khalid ibn al-Walid didn't rely on numbers or brute strength. He relied on anticipation, patience, and absolute control over the battlefield and the enemy's mind. Every movement, every retreat, every hidden cavalry charge was calculated to perfection. By turning Persian certainty into hesitation, he proved that brilliance can outweigh sheer power and that one genius strategy can change the course of history. If you want to see how strategy, patience, and psychological insight can overcome impossible odds, this battle is your ultimate example. Imagine being outnumbered 2-1, yet dictating every move of your enemy and turning their strength against them. That's the power of Khalid's genius, and the lessons are timeless, applicable not just to warfare, but to leadership, decision-making, and strategic thinking in any high-stakes situation. Don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our deep dives into history's most brilliant commanders. Every battle has a lesson, and Khalid ibn al-Walid's story is one you won't want to forget.